Thank you for tuning in to the second episode of Beyond Explanation. I am Brandon, joined by the Soulless Samurai, and we are here to discuss the second episode of Unidentified on the History Channel. But before we get into that, I wanted to do just kind of a brief moment and give a little introduction to my co-host, Chris. He goes by Soulless Samurai, and he is the vice president of the Penn Jersey Roller Derby, also a skater on the Philadelphia Hooligans, and coach of the Penn Jersey She Devils. And if you want to check out anything in relation to that, you can go to PennJerseyRollerDerby.com, or if you're interested in roller derby, you can go to PennJerseyRollerDerby.com. We'll make sure we leave a note in the description of the episode, so you'll be able to check down below. Make sure you crush that like button, by the way, especially if you love the Penn Jersey Roller Derby. I'm a shill, folks. I'm sorry. So, Soulless, tell me a little bit about you being the vice president of the Penn Jersey Roller Derby. That's a new thing for you, right?
Hey, B. Yeah, I've been president since February. It is new to me. It's a lot of responsibility. I have my hands in a lot of different pots right now. So,
yeah, it sounds like it.
There. Yeah.
It's nice to have a long title, though, right?
Yeah, true.
It's like yeah, I mean something.
Yeah, glutton for punishment.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, man, it all works. At least
Yeah.
keeps you busy. It keeps you busy, if nothing else, right?
Very true, very true. And I do love the sport and my roller derby family, so it's all worth it.
That's awesome. And so, how long have you been a skater on the Philadelphia Hooligans?
I think I joined around 2016. I originally started playing in Deptford with South Jersey Roller Derby. Moved over and joined the Hooligans.
That's awesome. And so, if someone is a fan of roller derby, or if they're maybe even interested in playing, like, how would they go about doing that?
We have a rookie orientation coming up, I believe, in August. There are a few local leagues. Ours, obviously, unbiased. We're going to start, like I said, in August. We've run a rookie program for about 12 weeks, and then they're able to start joining in our regular practices and everything. And we've taken people who haven't been able to skate and taught them how to skate and have a good time and play roller derby with us.
That's awesome. So with the Philadelphia Hooligans, that's an all men's organization, and then you're the coach of the Penn Jersey She Devils, and
Yes.
that is an all ladies organization. And
Yes.
are they on the same type of like track and all, or is that a different type of situation?
Yeah, so the She Devils recently started playing flat track roller derby through WIFTA. The Hooligans have been playing through the MRDA for a few years more. But the She Devils also play bank track roller derby, which there's only 6 teams, I believe, left in the country that play that rule set, and on a bank track still. It's one of my favorite things to play. It's one of my favorite things to watch. It's really enjoyable roller derby. We have the only one right now on the East Coast in our warehouse. The She Devils just got done participating in Battle on the Banked out in Houston, Texas, which is a bank track roller derby tournament that they do every year with all 6 teams. They came in 4th, I believe.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And didn't you yourself just make a team?
Well, yeah, I made the roster for the charter for the next couple months for the Philadelphia Hooligans. We qualified for playoffs, which could, if we medal in that, could qualify us to go to champs. It's really exciting. It's in Rome, New York. We're currently ranked 17 in the world.
Wow.
And would like to raise that up.
In the world?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Both WIFTA and the MRDA are international. We are participating in North American qualifiers, and there's also a European qualifiers for each hemisphere to get into champs.
That's awesome. Very cool. So PennJerseyRollerDerby.com if you're interested in anything that has to do with that. We are also talking about possibly doing some roller derby segments down the road on the show. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, definitely let us know. escapethemindproductions@gmail.com. And definitely think that's super awesome. I can't wait to check out what you guys have going. I know you've been rehabbing the facilities there for some time and getting everything super nice for everybody. So I'm definitely super pumped to come check it out.
Awesome. I need to give a huge shout out to my buddy Chris Schramm. He is one of the guys that does the Derby Rocks podcast, which I'm a huge fan of. They can be found on iHeartRadio and Spreaker. And his team, I think he coaches, Rock City, is coming down to play the She Devils on the 13th.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to find information about that, still PennJerseyRollerDerby.com?
Yes, that has our schedule, information on the teams, how to join, any of that information.
Awesome. Do you need tickets to go to a game?
Yes.
Okay. So you can purchase tickets on the website?
Mm-hmm. You can buy them in advance. They're a little cheaper, and then you can buy them at the door as well.
Awesome. Is there any type of like age limit or anything as far as that goes, or is it all ages?
No, it's all ages.
Awesome.
I think children under 7 are free.
Cool. And it is something that is kind of full contact, right? There's definitely some good action involved, but you guys are awesome with the whole sportsmanship aspect of everything. And I've always heard you guys are a little infamous around the league for how much fun you have when you play.
Definitely. We're winners of the after party for sure.
That's awesome. If we're going to be winners of anything, that's a good thing to be winners of.
Yes. We also have a very infamous cheering section.
There you go. That's awesome. Well, we're going to get on now to the review of the Unidentified episode 2. And I'm definitely super excited to continue on in the series. Again, I still feel that this is a really good thing for us to get started on in all aspects of everything, because it's been a topic that you and I have discussed so in-depthly for such a long time, and now this is kind of the first real deluge of information into the subject. So it's cool to finally start to unpack this piece by piece and episode by episode.
Agreed.
So the episode starts off with basically Lou Elizondo kind of doing a little bit of like, everybody needs to wake up and we need to realize that this is something that is real and it's something that's going on right now, as far as these are things that we don't know and are unexplained and that we need to take them seriously. And one of the things I wanted to amend from last week was, I know we had a little bit of confusion about whether he worked for the government for 20 years. He didn't work for ATIP for 20 years. He worked for ATIP for 8 years. And ATIP was the program that the government had on studying unidentified flying phenomenon, UFOs, whatever you want to call it.
They might have only been together for 8 years.
The whole program?
Yeah, it was 2007 to 2012.
Nice. Dropping knowledge. I love it. So one of the interesting notes that I wanted to mention was that it was one of the first times during the episode that they actually mentioned that the whole team of people that they continually reference through this, with Lou and Mellon and Tom DeLonge and all this. Everybody was brought. Justice. Yeah, Steve Justice, right. That everybody was all brought together by Tom DeLonge. That he was like the driving force behind bringing them together and forming this kind of super group of people. And we talked about last week that he was the executive producer on the show. So it was kind of interesting because you can see that maybe he's kind of aware that people don't trust him as much because he's not at the forefront of the show. They show him, he's there, but he doesn't really talk a lot.
Right. They really only showed his reactions to questions and some reactionary questions in the interview that he did, because him and Lou Elizondo interviewed Kevin Day.
Yes, and that's where the episode kind of starts off, is after the illicit fear-mongering in the beginning and kind of going back through everything again. They start off with their interview with Kevin Day, who was on board the USS Princeton the day of the incident. And Kevin Day was a radar specialist or operator. Apologies for my ignorance in that area.
There's a lot of info.
Yeah, exactly. So he they basically start to illustrate for you that the incident that happened with the Nimitz is something that actually started to occur about 4 days previous to the actual Nimitz incident.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kevin Day starts to talk about how he was the chief radar specialist. There we go. See, I actually wrote it down. There you go. Good job, Brandon. So it was on November 10th that they noticed that contacts started popping up on the radar off of Catalina Island. And he reports at first it was about 10 or so objects, and that the objects dropped from the upper atmosphere and appeared to form a flight formation flying south at about 28,000 feet at about 100 knots. And Kevin Day remarks that this is kind of highly abnormal because normal things that would fly at that altitude could not fly that slow, or they would fall out of the sky.
Right.
So they talk about how the Princeton was kind of seeing these objects over the course of the 4 days, and after 4 days of seeing things that they couldn't really explain or understand, and even thought at one point when maybe were glitches in the radar, he brings it up to the captain, and the captain finally agrees to send out 2 jets to intercept one of these blips and kind of see what's going on. And that happened to be Commander Fravor that we referenced in the first episode. That was the actual person, one of the 2 pilots that physically saw this with his own eyes.
Yes.
Basically, they talk remember the first episode. If you didn't see that, go back, Unidentified episode 1 review that we have, Beyond Explanation. We'll go through that whole thing. I don't want to beat people over the head with this because they do plenty of that during the actual episode itself, so we don't need to do that here too.
True.
So after the whole Nimitz incident, he went out, he flew, he saw it, he came back. He talked to Kevin Day and Kevin Day was like, what happened? What was going on? And he said, I don't really know what that was, but whatever it is, it kicked my butt. And so Kevin Day was like, okay, well, we need to file an action report on this and need to make sure that this is actually documented, that we ran into something that we don't know what it was. So being somebody doesn't have any military affiliation, I'm assuming that's what that means with an action report, but I'm assuming other people might know better. But basically putting it on record.
Yeah, making a log. And he said at one point there was well over 100 contacts.
That's right. So it started with 10, and at one point there was over 100 of these like blips on the radar that they didn't know what it was.
Quote unquote raining UFOs.
Yeah, and he said that they were kind of flying in formation and towards a particular point on the map.
Right.
And so when he went to go make the report, Kevin Day, after speaking with one of the pilots, he said that he went into the ship's computer and went to file the report, and all the external communications from them going through and actually seeing it, the gun cam footage, all that stuff.
The escalation in their dialogue.
Yeah.
And emotion.
All that was gone.
Right.
The timestamps were there, but the footage and the audio was gone.
Right.
He didn't know why, he said. He said it was like someone replaced it or erased it. And they could see like I said, they could see the time coding, but no images or audio. So they later mentioned that Christopher Mellon tried to track down the records of the events from the official archives. And the reason why that is important is because the official archives would have had the record that was on the server that was essentially reported to from the Princeton. So any of the information that the Princeton was receiving in from the different aircraft and whatnot would have then been sent out to this other server, so it wasn't housed solely on the ship.
And backed up remotely.
Exactly. So when he filed this, he didn't say specifically it was a freedom of information sort of deal. He didn't say what he did to get it. They just said that he got a hold of it, or he went and asked for it. And they said that the official archive came back and said that none of the information from the Princeton on that date was there. It was all missing for that specific date. I guess they said that they would have some type of like doc notes or footage or some type of information like that that was on record, and none of that was there. So
I guess the question then becomes, was it erased by the UAP or the military? The conspiratorial they, in
yeah,
quotes.
exactly. So the episode kind of goes on from there to say that the objects continued to fly until they disappeared off the radar. And when they disappeared off radar, they were in the area of the Catalina Island off of the coast of California, kind of near Mexico.
Santa Catalina Island.
Yes.
It's basically between LA and San Diego, just off the coast between those.
So after that's kind of where they leave off in that particular aspect, and then they go on talking about how they discuss why it is that people are hesitant to come forward in the Navy. And they basically say, they're worried about their careers, they're worried about their job, they don't want to be taken as fools, things of that nature.
Right.
So after that, they go to interview another gentleman named Gary Voorhees, who's another Navy officer that came forward about his story. And he worked on the Spy 1 radar on board the Princeton, from what I gathered.
Mm-hmm.
And he states that he started seeing weird things on the radar, again, a few days before the incident, and was told actually to completely reboot his systems so they could try to make sure it wasn't a software issue with the radar that they had on the ship.
He said that men showed up in a helicopter.
Oh, we're getting to that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting to that.
All right.
Yeah. So they reboot their system, and after they rebooted the system, the anomalies were still on the radar.
Ah.
So once they did that, they actually started getting in other reports from other ships saying they were seeing the same thing on their radar too.
Mm.
So now you have multiple ships' radars seeing these upwards of 100 objects that were moving towards this I'm going to call it Catalina Island because I'm not that suave. Sorry.
So yeah, that really makes you wonder, is it really an anomaly?
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to refrain from saying interesting a lot, but that's really what it is. So one of the things about it is that Voorhees said that the object, when they saw it, would drop at an incredible rate of speed, and it would go from about 28,000 feet down to sea level.
Right.
And it did this several times. And during one of the times in which that it did this, when it dropped down to sea level, the sonar crew on aboard the ship actually got a ping on the sonar from it. Mm-hmm. And they said that from the sonar, they saw that when it hit the water, it traveled at a speed 2 times faster than the speed of our fastest attack submarines.
Yeah, an unprecedented speed underwater.
It didn't matter what kind of medium it was traveling through, whether it was air or whether it was water, it was able to navigate both with ease. Voorhees also explained that after the Commander Fravor saw the Tic Tac object, that a helicopter had landed aboard the ship and that a person got out and had ordered to have copies of all the tapes and essentially to erase whatever was left over on the hard drives of the computer of that particular incident. And he said that he specifically was not provided an explanation as to why this gentleman needed those tapes or why he was supposed to erase anything. And he said it was also the only time during his career that he was ever asked to do something like that.
So we have an MIB encounter wrapped up in a UAP encounter.
And that's one of the things, if you follow UFOlogy, or I think that's how you say it, that you'll find there's stories of Men in Black. It's not that's kind of what the movie was loosely based off of.
Yes.
And a lot of them are really, really weird.
Yeah, every story I've heard about a Men in Black encounter is really weird. The shape-shifting, like their faces kind of melt. They have really eccentric mannerisms or eccentric clothing.
That's what I heard was the eccentric clothing, and also like the guy in Men in Black who was the bug that was wearing the person's skin, how he kind of didn't seem comfortable in his own skin.
Right.
That. You hear about that a lot.
And they typically are reported following someone's own personal UFO or UAP encounter.
Like hey, you maybe shouldn't talk about this.
Yeah, how about you give me that footage?
But, I mean, again, I don't know how much emotional stock you can put in that, but it's not hard to assume that there might be shadowy figures that work for unknown entities of the government.
Hey, either you believe it all or you believe none of it.
Yeah, and I tend to fall on one side of that and not the other, unfortunately, but I still find this stuff fascinating.
Yeah.
So, all right, we talked about new guy in the equation now, another eyewitness as far as radar goes, Gary
Mr.
Voorhees. What was that?
Kevin Day, you're talking about?
This is the second interview, Gary Voorhees.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So the first interview was Kevin Day. He was on board the Princeton. This is another guy who was another radar specialist, Gary Voorhees, who was also a part of the Nimitz carrier strike group. And he's saying that he saw this as well on his ship's radars.
Okay, right.
That's my understanding of watching it.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about that. All right. So after they talk about what he saw, and the guy showed up on the ship and requested copies of the data and to erase what they had, they go off to Lou Elizondo being on Catalina Island. He goes there and meets with a member of someone that works there who has access to areas that the public normally doesn't.
Right.
And
because it is a Navy training area.
Yeah,
right?
They still have things that go on there.
Yeah, and the Tic Tacs were flying through Navy training ground, which is another kind of key element to this, is that these people don't know if they were unwitting participants in a U.S. military technology testing.
Yeah, training exercise.
Yes, right.
So they basically talk about how the island since World War II has had fortifications built up on the island to help protect against invasion. And that back in the day, we'll say, it was also a training ground for the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA.
Right.
And that Lou said that he started to feel like possibly there were maybe patterns developing of these things being interested in certain strategic locations where they could kind of oversee our military. They talk about how there's an Air Force base about 30 miles up the coast from there where they do test flights for experimental aircraft, and how there's also SpaceX, where Elon Musk launches off the satellites, is another spot that's up there as well.
You have to consider there's a huge population of people there and a lot of transmission, a lot of radio transmission.
Yeah,
all that stuff coming out of that area.
It's not that far from a very heavily populated area. LAX is very close to there.
Yeah, and also TV, movies, like all those signals too are coming out of that area. So I wonder if that creates a hot spot on the map as well.
All of this is definitely something to consider for sure. So the founder, they also now go into another member of the team, Steve Justice, and they kind of precurse that by saying the founder of Lockheed Martin, Kelly Johnson, filed a report in 1954 where he documents seeing with two test pilots a large craft flying north of Catalina Island. Kelly saw it from the ground, and the two test pilots saw it from the air. Person, again, Steve Justice, that works for Skunk Works today, and Lockheed Martin, sat down with Lou to talk about the 1954 incident. They basically say that it's compelling, and that the most compelling thing about it is that Kelly Johnson, the founder of Lockheed Martin, felt so strongly about what he saw that he felt committed to write it down and then give that to the Air Force, who in turn came back and said, no, you actually just saw a rare cloud formation. Lenticular clouds, I think they called it. So Lou and Steve Justice kind of go through some experimental aircraft that we have used in the past and talk about how heat signatures were quite large from those aircraft. And so they were kind of ruling out that the experimental they were trying to rule out that the experimental technology that we had around that time would have been something that was capable of doing what they saw, basically.
Yeah, the main one that they talked about was the X-43. It was launched from a B-52. It exceeded Mach 5, so was in that speed range that they were looking at, but it also had a huge heat signature.
And they also talked about the fact that in the release of the different videos, there was 3 different videos, and we're going to get into those more as we get into the different episodes of Unidentified. Right now, we're just talking about mainly the one Nimitz video.
Okay.
So with that, one of the things that they want you to keep in mind is that these aircraft or whatever they are that they got on film that are flying at these extreme rates of speed normally need to keep an altitude of 50,000 feet, which a lot of these aren't doing.
Right, yeah.
So to achieve that much speed, you need height to, I guess, to essentially allow for error, you know, so in that way you're not plowing into the ground or and you know, inertia, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need plenty of space to go that fast.
So they start to illustrate more towards the end of the show that it's their biggest hurdle is to kind of overcome the stigma of UFOs in the past and how people feel about them. And also that they believe that there must be a pattern somewhere that they're going to be able to put together to kind of figure out what's going on here. They're just not really seeing what that pattern is.
Gotcha.
They show Chris Mellon, as we talk about, obtained a document, like a presentation from ATIP that shows UFO hotspots across the globe and also documents and goes through like a threat scenario. Now, the way that they were talking about the threat scenario and what I felt like what it actually was were kind of 2 different things for me. Because if I paused it and I was reading what they put up on the screen, and it talks about how it's a threat scenario where the science would exist for an enemy of the United States to deliver a weapon virtually anywhere on the planet at any time without detection, possibly using camouflage, instantaneous acceleration, jamming, little to no detectable signature as well. So to me, it wasn't them saying this stuff exists and we're vulnerable. It's if this stuff exists, we wouldn't know what to do with it. And I felt it was a little disingenuous with their wording of it when they were showing that part with that specific document where they were going through the presentation.
Right.
Because it's like, no, that was a scenario. It was a threat scenario. But that would tell me is that you are hypothesizing that if something like this were to happen, that we would be vulnerable to said situation.
Yeah, it's really hard to quantify those things, I feel like. And again, scare tactics.
A lot through a vast majority of the show. I would almost wish they would take a more of a we don't know approach rather than a we know this is real, you need to be scared of what this is and figure we need to put all of our emphasis on this essentially.
Yeah, Lou Elizondo is kind of hard to follow because he claims to know a lot and that he's been around a lot as far as
he was a part of ATIP, which is like a secret governmental organization that investigated UFOs. So he is privy to certain information that he can't talk about.
Right, and he's very in the know. But at the same time, he's very freaked out by the things that he doesn't know and pushing those scare tactics and things about like, hey, we need to pay more attention to this. But it just seems odd to me that he keeps trying to talk about how in the know he is, but then also act really clueless and be like, we need to figure this out. The way he interviewed Steve Justice, it seemed funny to me because, again, he is in the know and he should know about these technologies and stuff. And he basically, like, led the witness on that and kind of pulled the things out of him that he wanted to get out. And it seemed
they acted
forced.
Like, I don't mean to cut you off, I'm sorry. They acted like them interviewing him was them getting insider information when he's a member of their team.
Yeah.
Like, clearly he would have interest in the conversation going a specific way.
Definitely.
I don't know. Basically, to wrap everything up, and I feel like you could really sum this down now to a few sentences. We saw these things off the coast of California that looked like a Tic Tac, at some point possibly numbering into the hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
And we now have 2 eyewitnesses as pilots who saw one of them. And we have 2 radar operators who saw them on radar.
But no documentation.
Well, we have the video now.
We do have video.
Yes.
We have 1 or 2 videos.
The Nimitz incident, we have one, but there is a supposed video in the ethers that's much more clear of the same incident that they've referenced several times. It's actually a weather balloon. No, I'm kidding.
But yeah, so we have these eyewitness encounters, which are hard to trust, in my opinion. And then you have a real lack of evidence that's starting to accrue.
But they certainly don't feel that way, because to them, they're leading more and more credence to this with the more people that they bring into the mix. Because to them, they put a lot of credibility on eyewitness reports, which I think it's not hard to know is like one of the most irreliable things that's out there, because your brain will essentially could change what you think you saw anyway.
Yes, thank you. I was going to bring that up. That's why it's not acceptable, or it doesn't hold a very high priority in court and legal settings.
And I mean, that's one of the things that I often wonder, because especially for the 2 people that saw it, how clear was it? Like, was this a definitive object? Did you see like a flash of something that was white that appeared to not have sides, that was moving super fast? I can't imagine you could clearly, if you were sitting in the room and I sent something past you at 3,000 miles an hour, we'll even do it better. If you're moving at a high rate of speed and then I shoot something past you at over 3,000 miles an hour, how well are you going to be able to see that?
Looks like a Tic Tac with no windows.
Because I was wondering, like, how many times do you see something that's a blur, and the blur is just a color?
Yeah. Now, in defense of their argument, they're trained observers. But, yeah, it's got to be so hard to observe, collect all that data, especially when you're freaking out. And you're getting upset like they claim to be, and they said that the emotions escalated in the communications and all of that. And once somebody gets into that mode, even if you're a very good trained observer, if you have a military background and you're used to dealing in those high stress situations, I maybe trust you a little bit more to be able to collect that data, but it's still got to be really hard. And your brain is filling in gaps, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, for sure. And the more times that they go over this in their head, how much are they drawing conclusions and not even really realizing that they're starting to put those pieces together, rather than staying objective about what they really know and don't know. Mm-hmm. I know I've done that in my life. Like,
it's very easy to do, even if you're just telling a story or just going back and trying to remember things yourself. It is the folly of human memory.
Yeah. And all of us want to be more entertaining. Like, when we tell a story, it's hard to be like, I'm going to stay super factual on this, even though it's not nearly as entertaining for you to sit there and listen to this, where I could stretch the truth a little bit and I could probably get a giggle out of you. So I wanted to break this down and get this kind of more succinct, that I'm going to ask you a couple questions that we're going to try to continually ask you through each episode as we go.
Fun. Cool.
So then that way we can maybe gauge how we feel about things kind of as this unfolds.
Gotcha.
So the first one's super easy. Did you like the episode? As just a viewer, if you happen to stumble across it on TV, would you have kept it on?
It was immediately confusing because it started 4 days before the first episode. And I guess if you're doing it for effect, that's great. That's creative, but it really seems to obfuscate
We knew what you meant.
obfuscate the details quite a bit. Because even I was taken aback at first. Like, hold on a second. Is this the same encounter from a different perspective? Is this from a few days before? What's going on here? So it makes it really hard to follow the timeline of these things. And now you're also going back after you claim that there is a lot of factual information in episode 1. Now you're going back and talking to people who claim that evidence was destroyed and things like that. So it definitely kind of rounds out the picture a little bit and makes me a little more skeptical, if anything.
I don't understand why they chose to go that route with the timeline, because to me, it would make much more sense if they started this. Like, okay, so really quickly, I'll try to be super brief on this. If it was me making these last 2 episodes, the first episode would have been how the team came together, and give each person purpose as to why they're there. And I don't really feel like they maybe gave you a sentence, but it didn't really do it enough to sell you why these people have investment in even being here.
Yeah. And again, I think that's part of the obfuscation.
Yeah. So I would have started there, and then I would have moved on to what they're doing in the second episode of, hey, 4 days, I wouldn't have worded it that way, but essentially 4 days before the real stuff went down, we started seeing this stuff on the radar.
Yeah, lead us in a little bit.
Yeah, give me a little something to
us.
get me interested. Just a little something, give me a taste. And then from there, go into the actual build up to the Nimitz thing, and then work your way into what they get into in the next couple episodes. But instead, you hit me with a real quick, here's the players, this is the actual meat of the situation, and now we're going to delve back from that, and I'm going to restart you 4 days before that even happened. So it's like you're reading a book, you get to the ending, and then they're going to go back and then tell you why all that stuff happened after the fact. Where if you had just done it in the right order, you could have really sucked me in along the way.
Yeah, they definitely seem to be getting the cart in front of the horse there. And I guess that's we can blame Tom DeLonge on that one. It's that punk rock background. He's starting with the chorus and the hook first with the money shot, and then he's going to come back and give you the backstory.
Yeah. I mean, you got to work your way into the chorus. I don't know. Okay, so number 2. Do you think that the second episode made you feel that the whole endeavor is more or less credible? We'll say specific. Okay,
at this
let
point,
me rephrase.
Less.
Let me rephrase. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Do you feel like it's more credible with the players involved, we'll say, and who is presenting this to you? And then also, do you feel like the actual events themselves are credible? Would that be a fair question?
Yeah.
That's a little more clear, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, so they're definitely trying to do some mental gymnastics here and connect all these things. So maybe those anomalies didn't seem like a big deal. It was a little thing, but then the Nimitz encounter happened. Now all of a sudden those anomalies, those radar anomalies and such are a big deal. And they're trying to get the data for that. But it really seems like they started with the real meat of it, like you said, and as it rolls out, the more things that they try to bring to the table to convince me, the less convinced I am. Again, eyewitnesses are tough to believe.
Mm-hmm.
They started with the video, which I found very fascinating. Still look to that and am searching for an explanation there, but we're not getting an explanation. We're just getting more and more mysteries that they're trying to present here. So it's getting more muddled and confusing as we go.
Are we sure this wasn't produced by J.J. Abrams? Maybe. We might want to check.
Yeah, we might have to.
It's a mystery box. This is one of the things that, to me, is kind of one of the things that I kind of mull around in the back of my head as I watch this. And I feel like a lot of people do as they watch this who are big, like, in the UFO community. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like this is something that is like essentially the government allowing these people to come forward, and they know how much they're going to discuss about this, and it's essentially they're not backing, not necessarily supporting, but just they're okay with what they're all talking about on this? Because it just seems odd to me that all these people who are former military, and sorry for the spoiler, but as you get into later episodes, there's someone that's active military that start to come forward and give their accounts of these things. How are they allowed to do that? I don't understand how that would be okay.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair question, but you still have to question who these people really are and things of that nature. I guess one of the big conspiracy theories surrounding people like Lou Elizondo, Tom DeLonge, and Bob Lazar is that they're patsies. They're people that are leaked, people who are allowed to leak all of this
Implied
stuff.
patsies or alleged patsies, yeah.
Yeah, and they're meant to look like kooks and get out here and leak all this stuff that they're eventually going to disclose.
That's a dialogue that people have. I mean, that's a legitimate conversation that happens quite a bit. Is there ever a time that someone comes forward with this information and they're meant to essentially take you off of your path and take you down the, disinformation highway?
The old red herring.
Yeah, exactly. Or in the Bob Lazar situation, implant mistruths in truths.
Yeah.
Yeah. To make the whole thing seem like it's a bunch of complete nonsense, but in reality, there's aspects of it that are actual things. And to me,
well, that's my thing about Bob Lazar is he seems like he knows just enough to sound very knowledgeable, but is either a hell of a liar or he's really crazy.
Yep, and we're going to get into more of that in just a minute.
Okay.
So, last question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, let me finish up. My apologies about the last bit. So, with the situation with them coming forward, I feel like it's going to be interesting to see where that goes in the future, because when this is all said and done, I feel like this has to be something that I feel like we'll eventually get answers on. Like, there'll eventually be an article that nobody reads where they finally go through, like, why the To the Stars Academy actually happened and the whole story behind the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And who knows, maybe this whole thing will end up being legit. Maybe the whole thing ends up being a farce. I don't know. But in the meantime, it's hard to ignore that trained observer kind of aspect of it. But I just naturally don't have an inclination of believing the story that's kind of just told to me, like, this is the line we're going with on this. I kind of have a hard time feeling like each piece of that is real. And I feel like, I don't remember who said it online, but it's like we have to kind of maybe just take the footage as one piece of information and kind of discard the whole Tom DeLonge To the Stars Academy bit of this. Like, forget.
Right. That's what I'm like. I'm filtering my media a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, this is cool that this is coming through these channels, but
just think of it as maybe it's a shitty storyteller telling you a story.
Yeah.
But the story still could be a good story. 1, 2, maybe it really is fact. They just don't have a good way of conveying said facts to the masses.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the things I have. Like, they repeatedly say during the show, one of the things we're going to have to deal with is the stigma around UFOs. So you're aware of that, but it doesn't seem like you did a whole lot to make that not a problem.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, as we're
Yeah.
clearly skeptical people that are watching the show, thinking that we don't really know if we feel like this is legitimate, and they have done very little to take me off of the path of feeling like this is something that's still not legitimate.
Lou Elizondo is like, we have to let people know. We have to get on this. And he is talking to people like me and you. What are we going to do about it?
A podcast?
You heard it first here, folks.
That's right.
Changing the world.
So I'm pretty positive that we've already gone and answered this last question, but just to get it on record. So do you feel like you're emotionally ready to invest in that disclosure is real? Specifically from watching the second episode. Did that change your opinion of that at all?
Disclosure? Or just like a leaked or funneled disclosure, or an actual government disclosure?
Just disclosure in general, that this is actual unidentified flying objects, that they don't know what these things are, not necessarily aliens, but that this stuff actually happened.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that statement is true. I think these are things that they don't have answers for.
Okay.
Everything else is story time.
So then do you think that it would be something that would be more beneficial then for them to... Because I feel like you and I both agree they spend a lot of time hammering home points that they've already covered. And it's I don't know if it's just the History Channel in general on this, because I have watched other History Channel shows that do that a lot. And a lot of reality-esque TV does that a lot.
Very
where it's
sensationalized.
like, yeah, and it's like, do they assume you're staring at your phone so much during the episode that they have to recap everything they've already talked about every 5 minutes?
Yeah. Bring you back to the main point. I mean, that's also how they get you to, quote unquote. But it's also how you, if you're producing something like this, you really get that point across. You really get the bug, that phrase stuck in the head. I mean, it's a trick, for a lack of better term.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that'll about wrap up our Unidentified Episode 2 discussion. And it's something that I think will definitely continue on as we go through. I know I'm a couple episodes ahead, and if you don't want any spoilers on that, maybe tune out for like 5 seconds. But it's going to get a little more interesting as it goes. The next episode is a little not as exciting. I'll preface that. So I'm going to try to see if we can maybe cover 2 episodes in the next podcast.
Okay.
Because the 4th episode starts to get into the next video. So as I mentioned, there's 3 videos that got released by the Department of Defense, and that's kind of what spurred this whole Unidentified show. Mm-hmm. And the first one has been the Nimitz, and that's what we've been discussing over the first 2 episodes. So another one of the videos is called Go Fast. And that's going to be one of the next ones that they start to get into, is about another video that happened actually off of the East Coast, and wholly different craft.
Really?
Completely different.
Okay.
So it's going to be interesting. A little preface, little teaser there, and we're going to get into that a little bit more with the next episode of the podcast. But you can check all this stuff out on the History Channel. It's every Friday it airs. And they're on the 5th episode right now, so we're going to catch up hopefully next week and be pretty current. And then from there, we should be able to keep going. Make sure you guys stay tuned. Also, Escape the Mind Productions on YouTube, as well as Beyond Explanation. We're also on iTunes now. What?
Yeah, woo.
So you can find us on there, too. And just make sure that if you guys are enjoying the show, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. It really helps out so that they show the show to folks who might maybe know who we are, or maybe aren't aware of the subject. So one of the other things that I wanted to cover, and we're not going to get, I don't feel like, as in depth, but there's been a lot of crazy stuff going on over the last, 2 weeks? So we talked a little bit about Bob Lazar earlier, and there was the documentary that came out on Netflix by Jeremy Corbell, and it's essentially him delving into the Bob Lazar story, which is something that's been going on since the 80s, right?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, Mr. Jeremy Kenyon Lockyer Corbell.
Oh, wow, look at you.
Never trust someone with 4 names. So yeah, May 1989, he first told his story to George Knapp
So,
under an alias, Dennis.
yes, under the alias of Dennis. And this is something that, if you're interested in this subject, I feel like a lot of people probably have mulled over quite a few times because it's one of the more fascinating stories to have somebody actually came forward saying they were hired and worked on trying to, I don't want to say retrofit, trying to recreate an alien spacecraft, essentially.
Yes, yes. This story has a lot of interesting details. Um, his own work background, which he claims to
And
have
that's
had
kind of
access.
one of the things that we have to preface with this is that none of this is really substantiate. You can't substantiate any of this anymore
Nope.
because they can't find records of anything that this guy did. So,
Possibly erased by quote unquote they.
yeah, the Men in Black. There you go.
Yes, yes. So he claims to have worked on reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology at a site called S4 near the Area 51 Groom Lake operating location. So he hits a lot of buzzwords, and he's kind of noted for being the person who brought Area 51 to the American public, but he worked at a location near Area 51, not
Correct.
at Area 51.
So, from my understanding, and please feel free to help me fill in the blanks here because you were awesome and took some fastidious notes on this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to kind of, so what we're going to discuss now is going to be kind of a mixture, a hodgepodge of the documentary, which was, I think, UFOs, Bob Lazar and UFOs.
Bob Lazar, Area 51, and Flying Saucers on
And
Netflix.
that's the name of the documentary. It's on Netflix. And
Which is produced by George Knapp.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and a guy named Jim Martin, featuring Bob Lazar, and narrated by Mushmouth Mickey Rourke.
Oh, God. By far the worst part of the documentary.
Oh,
And
jeez.
let's just get into that right now. And then, but we're also going to tag on Joe Rogan because Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell were on Joe Rogan. You and I both watched it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk about that a little bit too. So we'll mix those two things together just because we're a little short on time. And also because I feel like they tie together. I watched them literally on the same day.
Yeah, it's they were all on Joe Rogan promoting the
Basically.
documentary and talking about the documentary. So.
Refreshing people about who Bob was so they would get interested in the documentary.
Right.
And I feel like the Joe Rogan podcast, to me, did more for the Bob Lazar story than the documentary did.
It lacked the kooky B-rated documentary aspects.
So I don't want to knock Jeremy Corbell as a person because I don't really ever want to do that on any type of like podcast that I do. But and so I don't take these knocks as that. But I don't understand why when you're dealing with something of this subject matter that you add extra hokiness to it.
Yeah.
Like why? Like the distortion, like random distortion during people talking, the random distortions of the screen to make it a little more eerie, the weird music over top, the terrible Mickey Rourke narration.
Well, I guess you have to try to do things to not make it really dry and unpalatable.
I feel like you could have done that though, and not done it the way he did it. So that's like how we were talking earlier with the show. I don't understand why you can't just do it chronologically. Because that was my biggest problem with the documentary is that he's like bouncing around all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's like, just start off with Bob and who Bob is and what made Bob Bob. How he went to high school. And then from there he went, I don't know which order it was, but he ended up going to MIT and he got his doctorate there supposedly. And then he went on to, what was the other one?
He worked at
I know Los Alamos, but he had another school. He had another doctorate.
Allegedly.
Yeah, he had 2 alleged doctorates.
I'm
My
not sure.
apologies, folks. It was MIT and there was another one. So then from
Couldn't
there,
find the records.
yeah, from there he goes on to work at Los Alamos, which is essentially a top secret weapons facility. Now, the thing that's interesting that I kind of liked, and I got this from, I believe, both the documentary and Joe, but they talked about it a little bit more on Joe, was how they talked about essentially Bob was this guy who was obsessed with rockets and propulsion. And that's kind of what led him down this road.
He's still an owner of the United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies.
Okay.
He still works in that field. He is obsessed with rocket technology.
So Bob made a rocket car when he worked at Los Alamos.
Mm-hmm.
I think he said it was a Honda. Could be wrong. Chevy maybe. But anyway, he put a rocket engine on his car. And he was driving it around town. Like, he would drive this car to work. Not like a novelty that he made and just is chilling in his driveway.
Right.
He actively drove this around town every day.
They showed him riding like a moped with a rocket motor.
Yeah, they did.
Documentary, right? Yeah.
And it ended up becoming so famous, or infamous, whichever one you want to go with, that they actually did a newspaper story on this rocket man, if you will, who drove around town, this crazy scientist that worked for Los Alamos and drove his rocket car to work every day. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that they ended up finding out of all of they didn't find any record of his schooling and his education. Los Alamos said he didn't work there. Yeah. All these things. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But so he works at Los Alamos. He does that. While he's working at Los Alamos, from my understanding, he applied for some programs that were a little more on the hush-hush side. And out of those, one of them actually got back to him. And they interviewed him. They basically talked about him working on advanced engines and propulsion, mm-hmm. the likes of which he had never seen. And were...
This S4?
Yes, but he didn't know that at the time.
Okay.
So he ends up taking the job. He mentions he goes to the specific spot. They load him on a bus with no windows, and they drive him to S4. And he gets there. He walks in. He sees a spacecraft with an American flag sticker on the side of it. America. And he immediately laughs to himself because he thinks, oh, this explains so much. We've had this technology the whole time, and it's really us. It's not UFOs.
Right.
He said he walked over, he touched it, and was immediately reprimanded for touching it. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
So basically, Bob goes into describing how there are different teams of people who work on a series of 9 craft that the U.S., allegedly, the U.S. government have. Mm-hmm. And he was only allowed to work on one of them.
Right.
But they essentially parsed these teams together to make it so that no one had all the information. And he said that when he would go and do things there, his lab assistant was Barry, I believe. He was only allowed to talk to Barry. He was only allowed to ask questions to Barry. If he was hypothesizing something and wanted to bounce it off of somebody, he had to do it with Barry, rather. Huh. So he talked about how that kind of like stymied the scientific evolution of what they were trying to do because it didn't allow for the collaboration of ideas amongst these people. And he said that's kind of part of science, is being able to bounce ideas off of each other as scientists and kind of figure out what maybe is doing these things.
Yeah, it's got to be very hard to do that with a lack of information passing around.
And one of the things he referenced, and again, my apologies, it might have been on Joe, was about the guy who he replaced died.
Yeah.
I don't remember ever hearing about that before.
Me neither. And they kind of... He got into it a little bit, but that was the only other instance I'd heard, or that was the only instance I had heard that.
He said the guy died from them. So they had 9 craft, and inside the craft were an engine. and the engine was powered by something that looked like, essentially, if you were to take a half circle or a flat surface and then put a half circle on it. And then if you were to remove the half circle, that it would power down. And that you could essentially only do this when no active power was being drained from the source.
Okay.
And that the engines themselves weren't actually hooked up with any active cords, batteries, or active cords, wires, anything of that nature. They weren't touching anything. So they took one of these engines and were trying to see if they could take what was powering it and cut it. Why? I have no idea. That seems like a terrible idea.
Yeah. Yeah, like trying to disarm a bomb.
Yeah, right? Trying to cut a bomb in half.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So they took some type of fancy cutter and tried to cut into this thing, and somehow the guy died. They didn't really get into specifics as to whether it went boom or whether he melted like Indiana Jones, but I'm assuming one or the other.
Right. Let's talk about some of his claims from while he worked there. His big one was that UFOs use gravity wave propulsion, which is what they were obsessed with figuring out, which is why that guy was cutting that core apart.
So they basically describe that as if you were to put something on your bed, and then if you take your fist and punch down on the bed in front of the object that you put in bed, the object would move towards your fist.
Okay.
So they said that's basically how this works, is that it produces an intense amount of energy in front of wherever it needs to go, and that energy is what actually moves that object in that direction.
Right, okay. So it's almost like not an explosion out, but
yes, it's not
when it
a chemical
implodes.
reaction that moves that object in said direction of the reaction, or the opposite, whichever one.
Creates a void and then causes that suction.
Yeah,
Just
essentially.
like when you take a really hot shower and the shower curtain tries to suck up against you.
Yeah, exactly. So,
fun fact, you just take the shower curtain about 6 inches away on each side, and that stops happening.
Wait, I'm sorry, what?
You know how when you're in a really hot shower, and the shower
yeah.
curtain just blows against you? You just need to break and allow airflow in on either side of the shower curtain, and it stops doing that.
So just like trim the sides in a little bit?
Or you just pull them in at the sides.
I
Fun
never
fact.
knew that. Science.
Yep.
I love it. So, so basically there's a form of propulsion that is allowing these craft to travel that we do not as of yet have.
And at this time, we're talking 1989, he claimed that it was powered by element 115, which was previously unsynthesized, undiscovered.
But isn't it supposed to, and again, I'm not a scientist, not even close.
I'm way out of my element here.
Dad joke. Isn't it that, weren't they saying it has to be a stable form of that element?
Which they haven't been able to use.
Correct. So we do have an actual element 115 now.
It's been synthesized, but
it can't actually do what they're trying to say this could do because it's not stable.
All of its properties are predicted or extrapolated. They've never actually been able to make it do what they predict. But because of its similar properties to its other homologous chemicals, like nitrogen, phosphorus, and arsenic, they think it's going to react in this way, but we still haven't been able to make it react in those ways. So it has unknown chemical properties, but probably is a post-transition metal.
So we have a guy that's come forward saying he used to work for the government, that he has extensive education, and that he was essentially hired to reverse engineer an engine with technology that we, as of yet, don't have with this type of propulsion. and that to do that, it utilizes an element that at that time we didn't think existed, and is today kind of theorized it seems to exist.
It was first synthesized in 2003.
But it was for a few seconds, right?
Yeah. And it was officially recognized in 2015 as one of 4 new elements.
Okay.
So it is recognized. It exists, but we have no handle on it.
But Bob talked about this back in the 80s before it was well before it was ever added to the periodic table.
14 or 15 years before it was even synthesized.
So you have that. The other claims that he had was that they had the 9 craft. All the craft were different. He called his model that he worked on the Sport Edition, I remember. And he talked about how they had essentially like 3 levels to the craft. There was the lower engine level, there was the mid level, and then there was the upper level, which he had theorized maybe had like navigational purposes.
Okay.
And he said he never saw the top. He only saw the mid and lower levels because that's all they allowed him to see, because it's all he needed to have access to. Gotcha. And they weren't even going to show him the lower levels, but he said he needed to see where they were positioned, where the engine was positioned in the craft, because it might have something to do with how it worked. Mm-hmm. One of the funny things I liked during the back and forth was him talking about how he's at work one day with Barry, and this guy comes in like, "Hey guys, you should come see this." And they go outside, and somebody has climbed into the UFO that he's been working on and is flying it around S4. And they said they got it off of the ground, kind of moving it around, and slowly, not anything too nuts at that, but they're just kind of showing that they can kind of get it up and moving.
Okay.
And they were able to actually pilot it around a little bit. And I remember Joe had asked him, "Did you have any questions like after that?" And he was like, "Yeah, no, we weren't allowed to ask any questions. It was just like, hey, look at this." And then nobody really talked about it. The other thing that was interesting was, so Bob worked there for a time. After Bob's been working there for a while, he said that you have to have this very strict security clearance to work there, Q clearance or whatever. And that part of that was having a stable home life. So after a time of him working at this place, that he said that he enjoyed it. And at first he was just kind of awestruck, but then he said that quickly turned into kind of terror for him, because after learning that the guy died from trying to cut the thing open, he's like, we really have no idea what we're messing with. And literally we could all die and have no idea as to what even killed us. He likens it to, what was that?
Not like it matters.
Yeah. He likens it to sticking a nuclear bomb back in the Renaissance time, and then they try to figure out how it works, so they cut it apart, and when they get to the nuclear parts, they die. But then the people who come in and check on them die. How long does it take before they think it's witchcraft and then just box the whole thing up because they don't even know why it's doing it,
Yeah.
So as he's coming to that realization, he starts not getting called into work. So this isn't like a normal 9 to 5 where you would just show up every day and do stuff. Like, from my understanding, they would be like, hey, we want you to come in tomorrow, be at this place at this time, and we'll pick you up.
Right.
It wasn't a, hey, just come every Monday through Friday from 9 to 5.
Yeah, he wasn't punching a clock.
So they stopped calling at one point. And I guess he took that as something was going wrong. So he started taking some of his friends to where he knew there were test flights going on. Because he said they occurred on every Wednesday. Oh, not every, but they always occurred on a Wednesday because that was the least amount of traffic in the area. It was the least traffic day of the week.
Gotcha.
In that town.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So they would go there, and lo and behold, they saw them doing the tests of them flying around the UFOs. And his friends say they saw it, the whole 9. So they get away with it. They see it, they leave, everything goes fine. Then they're like, we should do this again. So they go back. And then after that, they're like, we should do this again. And Bob says they came back and they brought a camper. And he's like, yeah, that was really dumb.
Yeah.
So that part is kind of where things start to, for me, go off the rails a little bit. I'm kind of on board to this point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the guy's super smart, loves rockets, goes to school, does really well, supposedly, and then goes to work for Los Alamos. And then his whole world is turned upside down after applying for this government job that he didn't really realize what he was getting himself into. Right. All that seems movie of the week-esque, but believable.
Yeah, yeah.
Then, after the third time he said of going to this place and watching these craft and these test flights with his buddies, sitting there drinking, smoking, having a good time, they get busted. And after they essentially like let his friends go, and then they detain him and are like, you know that when we said top secret, it didn't mean bring your friends and show your friends, right? Like being very condescending to him.
I mean, he kind of deserved that.
Sure, if this is true.
Yeah.
And then they let him go.
Okay.
And basically are like, you don't work here anymore. But before they let him go, they were like, hey, the real reason we weren't calling you is because your wife was having an affair, and we tapped your house because you agreed to it for this security clearance, and we didn't know what was going to happen with your wife cheating on you, so that's why we stopped calling.
We were just trying to listen if you were talking about aliens, but little did we know.
Yeah. And so, from my understanding with the documentary, that was the same lady, right? His wife? That was the same wife? It didn't say he ever got remarried.
True.
So I assumed the wife in the documentary that they showed on Netflix was the same wife that cheated on him. Because I was kind of wondering why Jeremy Corbell never asked her about that. Like, what led to her leading astray? Because maybe that would lend credibility to the story of her being like, I thought he was cheating on me because he was disappearing all the time from him doing these random things he couldn't tell me about for his job.
Yeah, that's a huge part of the story there that is just kind of glossed over.
So
he seems to mention it, Bob Lazar himself, as proof that he is who he is. But again, a very weird thing to bring up and put yourself out there.
The affair itself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you're still with the woman.
Yeah. So that happens. They tell me it doesn't work there anymore. Done. Sometime after that, they didn't really get into specifics. He ends up running into George Knapp and tells George Knapp his story. And George basically wants to come forward and tell people about it, but he needs to check out and see if Bob is really who he says he is. Mm-hmm. So George does extensive research, figures out that he can't find his school records. He can't find the record of him working at Los Alamos. Los Alamos said, we have no record of a Bob Lazar ever working here. They find, through lots and lots of digging, a phone record of like a phone book from Los Alamos, and it has a Bob Lazar listed in the phone book. Mm-hmm. They found the newspaper article that they did on him and his jet car, and it specifically says Bob Lazar, scientist at Los Alamos. Mm-hmm. So there is possible credibility leading to his story from those two things. Or maybe he just lied to the reporter from the newspaper. Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, the thing I got about watching him speak to Joe Rogan, now he seems more credible speaking to Joe, but I also thought I saw more traits of a pathological liar when he was talking to Joe. Little tics he had, weird things he would do when he was trying to quote-unquote remember a story, the complaining about the migraine. There's almost always an excuse on why there's a lack of detail, but then over-detail on weird things that we don't need detail on.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. There's just so much to dig into with this. Like, and
we haven't mentioned the fact that he's a felon.
we're getting to that. I was getting to that. All this has been off the top of my head, by the way, with the Bob Lazar stuff. Yeah, that's how much I've looked into this. Like, that's the thing. Like, all of this, I find immensely fascinating. I don't know whether to believe any of it.
He gets brought up all the time as being like the original government patsy for leak disclosure. People think that he was the first person that was allowed to come out and start leaking stuff.
So, yeah, that is something to remember, because like there are folks out there that believe it's a kind of a government like a government program. Like they essentially made up Bob and brought him out into the world, possibly to do like what the To the Stars is doing now, with like a disclosure sort of deal. But it didn't work. Is the scuttlebutt on that one?
Yeah, it could have been his criminal convictions in the spotlight. That it seemed like it all came crashing down at that point, which again is why I think they do these things in the order that they do. Like, if they don't start with the fact that Bob Lazar saw these things, is claiming these things, and then they go back and tell you he has no evidence of ever working anywhere or getting an education anywhere, and then you find out that his career came crashing down because of legal troubles, all his original statements are thrown into question immediately. Yeah. So they have to definitely choose the way to unveil these things to make it seem a little more believable.
And they definitely didn't do a good job of that, for sure.
No. I mean, the sad thing is they probably fool a lot of people, and I'm not even trying to claim any moral high ground. I just am very skeptical of people in general.
Yeah, and I honestly, I wouldn't have a problem if somebody felt that this is 100% true. I could see why you would feel that way.
Agreed. Yeah.
I really can, because there's times that I question how I feel about it because of just, it's hard to believe that someone would want to lie that much for that long. But all right, so let's finish up the story, and then we can kind of get into our thoughts on it, because we're almost to the end.
Okay.
So Bob stops working there. After he stops working there, he starts talking to George Knapp. George Knapp gets his story, does some background on him to validify, to find out that he really is who he says he is. And then George is like, look, we need to run on the story. I want to air it. They did it with, from my understanding, him being masked over and being called Dennis, and then said, look, let me know if this is what you want to do. And then the day of, Bob's like, I don't want to do it. And then they kind of joked around that George wrestled the tape away from him and aired it anyway.
Right.
And so after they did that and things aired, obviously things kind of got crazy. Bob said he got a phone call that was like, you have no idea what we're going to do to you now. And then they hung up.
That's fun.
So long story short, Bob buys an Uzi. I remember a funny story, which I don't think was in the documentary or in Joe Rogan, but I've heard it through other Bob Lazar stuff that I've listened to, that he went to the gym, he had the Uzi in his glove box, he came out from the gym, his car doors were open, and the Uzi was on his front seat. Like, we know you have this, and we can still get to you.
Wow.
I thought that was interesting. Yeah. Another funny little tidbit, they showed a little video of Bob during the documentary and on Joe Rogan of him shooting the Uzi at like a test range. He immediately touches the barrel after shooting the gun. And he's like, oh, it's hot. Huh?
Rocket scientist right there.
Right? But I've known people who are incredibly smart and have no common sense whatsoever. So maybe that was what that was.
Yeah.
But it's like, how, if you're that smart, how do you not know you just shot a fully automatic weapon that the barrel's not going to be hot?
It gives off heat. I mean, that's something that you calculate in everything you do.
Right? Propulsion.
Somehow missed that.
The whole nine. Anyway.
I mean, maybe he didn't really have that education.
Maybe.
Who are we to say?
That was just something that I saw that to me, like, my brain was like, huh?
Yeah, dude, there's a lot of those things in this where even some things he says just, I do that dog that just got shown a card trick, like, "Arr?"
Yeah. So the report goes out. Things kind of get crazy for a time. Bob semi goes into hiding.
1 year. Only 1 year goes by. If you're talking about what I think you're talking about. 89 to 90, there's this, and then the shit drops about his.
Okay, so
troubles.
from my understanding, George got a phone call.
Mhm.
I might be wrong on this. And they're like, so Bob got arrested? And from my understanding, Bob wrote a computer program for a brothel.
Yes, and his official felony charge he pleaded guilty to was pandering, which is essentially pimping. So
Wow.
he was accused of drawing people into the brothel and also installing surveillance cameras and recording stuff at said brothel illegally.
So that even went a little further than I thought. So he
pleaded guilty.
I was just about to say, so he pleaded guilty, and then he tells the judge about his story, about him working at S4, and essentially, like, maybe this is, like, the only way he can make money now because he's scared to be out in public, I guess? I don't know.
Going back to the world's oldest profession.
Yeah, I don't know what the payoff was. Like, I get maybe why he told the judge, but I don't really know what he was trying to get out of that. Like, is that like your insanity plea? I guess. So anyway, so the judge apparently gets super ticked that he can't substantiate anything that Bob is telling him.
Mm-hmm.
And is like, look, dude, I'm going to lock you up if you don't stop lying to me and telling me these stories. And some things go by, some time passes, and then the judge, if I'm remembering, kind of lets him off, right?
Oh no, he got in trouble.
Okay, so
what
ended up after he told it? Because I remember the judge said something along the lines of, "It's very hard to substantiate your story," but, and then so what was the final ruling on it?
He pleaded guilty and he was officially convicted of pandering.
Did he get a sentence or anything?
Yes. Hazy on those details. I think it was basically like a year's worth of jail time and probation, I believe.
Okay.
I think he did a year of jail.
So he gets out, and then essentially things are kind of fuzzy because it kind of died down in the whole world of Bob Lazar between then and then a couple of years ago when Jeremy Corbell started working on this documentary again, because it essentially became Bob Lazar was he didn't want to be talked to. He didn't want to be found, essentially. Because I've never looked into it, so I could totally be wrong on this, but it's not like, to my knowledge, he's ever done like the Alien Con circuit or anything like that to try to make money. Like, he's always been a bit of a recluse.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, he still has that company that sells
The fireworks?
engineering supplies and stuff.
Or they showed him making fireworks in the documentary.
Oh, yeah. No, he's a owner of United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies.
Okay. So it's just the whole story just gets weirder and weirder as you go. It's like aliens aren't even the most odd part of the story, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, and then you throw pandering in there.
Yeah. So if you want to check it out, the documentary's on Netflix. Bob Lazar, Area 51 on UFOs, right?
Yes.
And
flying saucers.
We will very upfront say that if you're going to watch it, just make sure it's something that you're interested in as far as the subject goes, because both Chris and I think, had to kind of get ourselves through the whole thing, because he said he stopped watching it at one point about halfway through and then went back and finished it, right?
Yeah, that's in my notes.
So, documentary, even for folks, even for us, who's very interested in the subject, we didn't find super fascinating. But the Joe Rogan interview with Bob Lazar is awesome. I would highly, highly, highly suggest watching that, because to me that was far more fascinating to watch Bob just flat out tell a story without all the editing and all the fancy overtones of, you know, silliness. It's just Bob.
It's a lot less leading.
Yeah.
Like the guys on Unidentified, seem to really lead the interviewees. Joe seems to get frustrated a couple times at their lack of details or lack of evidence.
He says to them a couple times, "You're not making any sense."
Yeah. They start spinning a yarn.
Yeah. So I definitely feel like the documentary was something that if you're interested in the Bob Lazar story and interested in the tale and you want a semi-new, fresh take on it, that it's worth a watch. But definitely keep in mind there's a lot of kind of B-movie tomfoolery in there with the whole bad Mickey Rourke narration and the random distortions thrown in and different things like that. I really could have lived without that.
When Mickey Rourke just starts waxing philosophically or like poetically, I had no idea what was going on. He's talking about trees burning, and
he starts going off about mountains
flowers.
At one point,
yeah.
And I'm like, what the F are we talking about? Like, I don't even know where we're going with this. And it's like poetry almost.
Yeah.
That he had Mickey Rourke read over these random shots and things that he had in between scenes. It's just terrible. Like, you could have gotten so many other people to read that, and it would have been maybe like, oh, okay, I could see, it's artistic. I could see what you're doing there. Mm. But the Mickey, it's so gravelly and so grumbly, his voice. He sounded like Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Well, he was a professional boxer for a bit.
Sure.
He got his brains rattled.
But all the more reason as to why am I picking this person to do the narration of my movie?
Yeah, so in that vein, something that I wish that we had brought up during the Unidentified discussion.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That computer-generated bird.
Oh, yeah.
Flew across.
I was debating as to whether or not I wanted to mention it, but since you brought it up, we'll talk about it.
If we're going to point out bullshit, we got to point it all out.
Yeah, that's true. So during Unidentified in the second episode, there's a part where they're just showing it's like a cut. Where they're going in between and they got him driving down the road.
Shot of a car driving down the road.
Yeah. And they have a bird that comes flying across the screen. And I've had to watch this a couple times because the first time I watch it, just to kind of see how I feel about it. The second time I watch it, I'll usually take notes. And then Chris and I will watch it together later. So when we were going through and we were watching it the third time, I was like, wait a second, was that a computer-generated bird? And he was like, I didn't even see it. So we backed it up and we replayed it. And as the car is driving down the street, they totally have a computer-generated like fake bird, even with a sound effect, fly across the screen as the car is driving by. I'm like, what? So if you're BSing people at that small of a level, how far does the BS train go?
Exactly.
Like,
it's just another red flag to me. Like,
and if you're going to be aware of this crap, and that's why I said this earlier, where you're like, we got to get around the stigma. Why are you doing stuff like this? Mm-hmm. Like, keep it as factual and as straightforward as possible. Don't give people these stupid things to pick at. And that's why I didn't mention it earlier, because I'm like, people are going to think I'm being nitpicky. That we're just like, every little thing that we can possibly crap on this, that we're going to, and that's not what we're here for. Like this, we legitimately are interested in this topic. And I want to know if these people are being real and factual with what they're trying to do. And you and I have been going back and forth about this for over a year now.
We could debate somebody's eyewitness account or somebody's thoughts, feelings, or anything in that regard, but it was very obvious that was a fake bird flying across the screen, and there's no room for judgment on that one. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So we will definitely continue to watch Unidentified on the History Channel on Fridays, so definitely make sure you tune in for more of that. Beyond Explanation on YouTube, also on iTunes, and also Escape the Mind Productions at gmail.com. Don't forget PennJerseyRollerDerby.com if you guys are interested in that at all. And I just really appreciate everybody for tuning in. I know that for us, we will continue to do this because it's kind of our passion project, and we're going to talk about this regardless. So
Yes.
hopefully people listen to it, but I mean, we're going to really enjoy talking about this anyway. So I think it's fair to say for the Bob Lazar thing that both of us are still kind of up in the air, mostly on the probably not telling the truth side, but also on the it would be a lot to have to keep that lie up for so long to so many people, unless you are truly that big of a pathological liar. Because it's his wife, it's his friends, it's everybody.
Yeah.
They even show his mom at one point. I forgot to talk about that.
Oh yeah.
They show his mom at one point, and his mom talks about how they made his birth certificate disappear, supposedly. And she says, yeah, like, one day we just couldn't find his birth certificate on file anymore. And she's like, it's really scary to think about somebody's like trying to disappear my kid.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's so there are a lot of aspects to the Bob Lazar thing that make me want to believe that. Like, why would this person want to do this for so long and put themselves through this so repeatedly, other than, I mean, he doesn't seem like he likes the attention, getting migraines and all that other stuff, supposedly.
He seems very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So,
almost like the Men in Black, very uncomfortable in his own skin.
Yeah. So, I mean, we certainly say we leave that open to your own interpretation on that. And I could certainly understand how you would fall on either side of the fence on Bob Lazar for sure. If you could feel like it's total crap, or, 100%, this guy definitely did this, definitely worked for the government, and definitely tried to reverse engineer an alien spacecraft.
I was on both sides of that fence, like, that whole day, watching the documentary and doing research and such. I mean, it's really easy to flop from one side of the fence to the other.
Yeah.
Just read about that guy.
Is there anything about Bob Lazar that I didn't mention that you wanted to cover in your research that you did?
No, I think we hit it all. Well, I guess we even touched on the fact that a lot of conspiracists claim that he's an agent for the U.S. government, providing leaked disclosure. He's kind of pointed at as being one of the first ones. Was George Knapp a respected journalist before this whole thing? So him interviewing Bob Lazar was what drew him into doing.
It was the biggest thing he ever did with Bob.
Okay.
But to my understanding, yes, he was a legit Action News guy previous to all of this going down. And then when this happened, it essentially became his life. But that's some of the, with him producing the documentary, which, okay, super quick aside, don't let me forget where I was falling off on that.
Okay.
If he produced it and he let himself be recorded that crappily, there's one part, George Knapp is a radio guy. He's got a great voice. We talked about this on the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
You have the guy in the middle of an open room and you're recording him, and I can hear his voice bouncing off the walls all the way around the room. What? The other half of his interview, 75% of it's over the phone.
Yeah, on speakerphone.
On speakerphone. You have awesome, amazing radio announcer voice guy, and you record him in two of the crappiest ways possible to put him in the documentary.
Yeah.
You couldn't have done a voiceover or something?
Right.
To make it a little bit better? Anyway, so...
And he did Coast to Coast.
Yeah, so George Knapp did Coast to Coast AM. Art Bell, I believe, started it.
Oh,
and then George took it over. I could be wrong on that.
No, I think you're right.
And so George, essentially after this, just kind of like ran with it and made it his career because of the fact that the mainstream media wouldn't take him seriously after he started down the Bob Lazar trail, supposedly.
Gotcha.
So it's...
I've seen people come back from racist comments and...
Well, yeah,
other such
Roseanne
things
didn't come back yet.
Oh, that's true.
So he definitely seems to have vested interest, and that's what they were talking about with the whole pandering thing with him and the brothel, was because George was like, "Oh my God, my biggest story is now eating his credibility alive by
Yeah.
becoming a virtual pimp, and I like need to do something to help him out because it also is going to help me out."
Save him a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some people had a bit of a problem with that because they're like, well, if he's really just a reporter, why would he have any vested interest in what Bob does in his personal life? Because you're just there to report.
Right.
You know, you're only there to actually talk about the events of what happened. You're not there to protect him.
Yeah.
If
True.
he ends up being a wackadoo, then he ends up being a wackadoo. You know, then you just have to report on that and then walk on, you know? So this whole thing is a huge oddity. I think that's the kind of the interesting thing with Bob Lazar. It's was it an enigma wrapped in a riddle, or a riddle wrapped in an enigma?
Yes, for sure.
It's one of those things that it's just I don't know if we'll ever unpack that. I hope that at some point with this whole thing, like I said earlier, with Through the Stars, the whole nine, that we end up having a definitive end to this.
Yes.
That we have a definitive answer at some point. But whether or not that's ever going to happen, I think remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, that's what keeps us turning for more.
Yep. And that's what we'll continue to. And, you know, we have a lot of fun ideas, too, because we're not just going to do Unidentified. When that show wraps, we're going to start covering some different events and things that have happened over the history of time.
One of the encounters, other paranormal, unexplained mysteries.
Yep. One of the things I know that Chris and I really want to delve into is Stuxnet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we also really want to... What's that?
CRISPR.
Yeah, CRISPR, and also want to talk a little bit more about Skinwalker Ranch. And I know that's a topic that's been covered, but him and I also find that extremely fascinating. So if you are into those types of subjects, definitely make sure you like and subscribe. Beyond Explanation, Escape the Mind Productions on YouTube and on iTunes and on Twitter. And you can also find us at escapethemindproductions@gmail.com if you want to write us or to give us any thoughts or opinions or ideas for the show. And also don't forget PennJerseyRollerDerby.com for any events coming up with the Philadelphia Hooligans and the Penn Jersey She Devils. You guys have a bout coming up again on the 13th.
Yes, in Philly.
In Philly. And it's the She Devils versus the Rock City.
Yep.
Awesome. Memory's not gone yet. All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. We do very much appreciate it. For Solus and for Brandon, take it easy now. We love you.
Yes, thank you, friends.